Hello, my name is Jalen De Leon, and my art history final video project will be about the artist Titian, as well as his role and influence on High Renaissance and Manierism. So for my first slide, we're going to be going into who is Titian and what is the High Renaissance and Manierism era during art history. So first, I want to start with High Renaissance. So this period was roughly spanning from the late 15th century to the early 16th century, and I would say it's marked by a peak in artistic achievement and intellectual exploration in Europe, but it's most prominent and more particularly in countries like Italy and Rome. So as a whole, though, it started building off of the early Renaissance, which is, I would consider, the more traditional side of art history. So artists during this time period tended to use techniques like linear perspective and anatomical accuracy to create more lifelike and idealized human figures in their work. But there was also a big focus on proportion and balance, as it was deeply rooted in these classical ideals from ancient Greece and Rome. Some other famous artists, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo, also came from this style and time and art period. So if you know their work, it'll probably give you a general idea as to how their styles were as a whole. But this period of art can be described also by its traits of mostly beauty, order, and/or human potential. So next we're going to be talking about Manierism. So Manierism came right after the High Renaissance, roughly in the early to mid 16th century, as a reaction to the perfection and harmony of the previous era, because rather than idealizing nature, Manierist artists tended to distort their art in a way to explore more emotion, more elegance, and intellect. This art period also reflected a time of cultural and political uncertainty in Europe, which may or may not have influenced the often unsettling tone of the art. Figures or subjects in Manierist paintings also tended to appear more elongated. Figures were in more unnatural poses, and artists also utilized spaces that were more complex and intricate. But as a whole, Manierism, I think, stands as more of a transitional style in art history by bridging, I think it bridges the Renaissance and the Baroque era. And the Baroque era is a more dramatic and intense art time period in history, but unfortunately I will not be going into the Baroque era. And going forward, we're going to be talking about Titian. So who is Titian? Titian, also known, or his full name being Tiziano Vecellio, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. He was a monumental figure in Western art history. He was estimated to be born around 1488 to 1490, and he died on August 27, 1576, which made him around 88 years old. But to put it in a nutshell, his work reflects more of a dynamic progression from the balanced compositions of the High Renaissance, but he also included expressive complexities in Manierism. Artworks we're going to be talking about, we're going to be including Venus of Urbino, Sacred Profane Love, and Venus Adonis. So next we're going to be going over to Titian and the End of the Venetian Renaissance by Tom Nichols. So this is going to be my first book source. To summarize the book, Nichols goes into Titian's role in the Venetian art scene while still going into more depth on Titian's contrasting ideals in comparison to the then traditional way of art. This is a biography piece, and it's a pretty long one at that, but 2 points that I got from this book was Nichols' point of tradition versus individualism, as well as Titian's overall impact on Venetian art. For the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to be quickly going over some of Titian's works. In order to not go over time, I'm just going to quickly point out some High Renaissance or Manieristic ideas that these paintings had, as well as why I chose them in some of them. So for the first one, we're going to start with Venus of Urbino, which was done in 1538. So I chose this because, one, it was probably one of his more famous works of art, and two, this painting includes a nude woman figure, which is Venus, the goddess of love, and she is in a very sensual reclining pose, which was very different from High Renaissance, I would say, and it is more falling towards a Manieristic style of being more expressive, emotional, as well as just it blurs the lines between divinity and human nature. Next we have Sacred and Profane Love, which was done in 1514, and I chose this because I think it was a good embodiment of High Renaissance ideals. I thought this because of, one, it's very balanced composition in terms of both the figures and the background itself. I think that this was done in a very traditional way. Even though these subjects are nude, it still delves into a more traditional way of art at the time. And then finally we have Venus and Adonis, which was done in 1554. I actually had the opportunity to see this in person at the Getty, but as a whole, I think this painting exemplifies the mannerism style very well because of its asymmetrical composition, as well as its very complex background, as well as it also goes into a very emotional and intense story. So to end off my slides, I have my sources page right here, which lists all the websites and the books that I used to complete this video project. And as for the next part of this project, it'll be just a short time lapse of my own rendition of Venus of Urbino done in charcoal. Due to time limitations, I wasn't able to render it as fully as I wanted to, but still I wanted to include this time lapse. But thank you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this video.